Beyond the Wrench with Jay Goninen from WrenchWay.
If you're enjoying Beyond the Wrench, remember to follow and rate our podcast to help support the show. Right now, we'd like to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, Lithia Motors. Lithia Motors started in 1946 as a single-point Dodge store and has since grown to be the second largest publicly owned automotive group in the nation. Lithia Motors currently owns and operates over 280 stores in the United States and Canada. If you're interested in partnering with or working for a Lithia shop, learn more at lithia.com.
Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. On today's episode, I am extremely excited to welcome Morgan Dolan from US Xpress. Morgan, how are you doing this morning?
I am great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited to actually do this podcast with you. We did a kind of pre-podcast intro a couple of weeks ago, and I walked away just absolutely impressed with everything that you're doing with US Xpress, and really, I think I said it on the call, but felt like you were wise beyond your years. You really bring a lot to the table, and I think you'll bring a lot of insight today for our podcast listeners. So before we get into talking about recruiting techs, let's talk about you. Give us a little background on you. What do you do?
Yeah, so I am the Senior Maintenance Recruiting Manager for US Xpress. I have been with US Xpress going on 3.5 years at this point. Started out as a recruiter, went into an HR business partner role for a little bit, got to work on the retention side of things, quickly realized that side was not for me. I much prefer the hiring, the good news, the competitive side of recruiting. And so I was able to get back to TA in my leadership role, and now I have a team of 4 recruiters under me, and we do all things staffing for our shop and corporate maintenance roles.
And where are you out of?
So I am in close to the Chattanooga area. I'm actually in North Georgia, but I am based out of our headquarters, and then my recruiters are based regionally throughout the U.S.
But a Wisconsin native. I always, whenever we do the podcast and I've got somebody with Wisconsin ties, I'm definitely a Wisconsin homer. So I always have to call that out. But grew up near Milwaukee in Wisconsin, and went to college there, then shipped off down south, right?
Yes, absolutely. The northern winters, just not for me. So definitely love to come back and visit, but I'm living for the weather down here.
I don't blame you one bit. I always tell people I was born and raised in Wisconsin, and somehow you'd think you'd get used to it, and you just don't. Those 3 months, January, February, March, are just absolute killers. Other than that, pretty good, but the January, February, March always seems to be tough.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely do not miss that.
Well, I'm jealous. So talk to me a little bit about your role. When we talk about recruiting techs, what all goes into that? It's a big job, right? Obviously, there's maybe not enough people out there right now to actually go find those people, and that can provide some challenges. But give me an idea of what your role entails. Are you reaching out to techs? Are you just trying to get in front of them and kind of show off your story? What are you doing?
Yeah, so tech recruiting, it's very high volume, very fast paced. It's a high turnover industry, which is something we're working to combat on the HR side of things, but also just not a lot of people entering the industry, and it's just very passive recruiting. So we don't get a ton of active applicants. So we are out there hunting, building our brand awareness, trying to sell them on us. Our type of recruiting is very much sales focused. You have to be able to tailor everything about your position and your company to that individual, hone in on what they're looking for, because they know you're going to come find them. So they're not coming to you.
It's tough because I think most shops don't understand that part, right? And even though they read about it everywhere, there's a shortage. Every trade publication you pick up talks about it, and yet we kind of are still stuck in a lot of our old ways. And that's one of the things that we see on the WrenchWay side is some of the challenges that come along with that, because it is It is tough. You do have to sell yourself, and really, it's been a almost a paradigm shift in general to where you have to change your approach to it because they're not knocking down your door anymore looking for a job, and it's quite the opposite, right? You're out trying to find these people because when you have open bays, it can be a real challenge from a business standpoint, and when you don't come to terms with that, it's really hard to fix the problem. And that's one of the things I loved about our conversation earlier was you've been very proactive with this. And I think maybe some of it comes from you had a little bit of a different background coming into this, right? It wasn't like you were always around recruiting diesel techs. You had some different background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in recruiting since 2016, directly out of college. I just kind of fell into it and then fell in love with it. But I started out doing retail recruiting and then moved into healthcare, which is equally as difficult to staff. A lot of the lower level positions aren't paid great, and they are doing the brunt of the work. So certified nursing assistants was one of the main things that I staffed, and we faced similar pain points, high turnover. They would jump ship for an extra dollar, an extra 50 cents an hour, better shifts or anything like that. So I have been on all facets of the high volume recruiting, but was completely new to diesel mechanics. So I am continuously learning about it as we go. But it's definitely been a new and welcomed challenge. There's definitely some transferable pain points from all of the different areas I've recruited in.
How how hard was it to get a grasp of what you did differently than other shops, that like the really kind of the selling points of what you would go to a technician with? I know there were some things that you guys had changed internally, but when you sat down and looked at it and you're like, okay, I'm going to reach out to this individual and I'm going to sell them on this shop, what was it that like were there things that you could pick apart and be able to see like, hey, we do this really really well, or was that some of the kind of raising of the flag to say, okay, we need to change this one thing, we're pretty good at this thing, where we need to help out here? Is it more just kind of analyzing where you're at currently and then being able to attack from there?
Yeah, so I think it's multifold, right? So doing your market research, what are other companies doing that we're not doing, but also what are we doing that our other companies are not doing, and how can I tailor that and make that specific to us? Sorry, that's Henry in the background
Oh,
there.
hi, Henry. No problem.
And so it's just about figuring out how you're different and what makes you stand out. Also, picking up on the context clues in your phone interviews with that specific candidate. So if they hone in on they have a family and they want to be home for the weekends, and we have a Monday through Thursday shift available if we're running 410 schedules, and being able to say, hey, you're never going to miss a weekend softball game again. We have a Monday through Thursday schedule for you. We're just kind of tailoring that to them, but also asking questions with my shop managers. What makes your shop stand apart? So we have standardized practices across our shops, but each one has a different feel, has a different manager with a different leadership style, and being able to speak on all of that. So just asking a ton of questions. I owned that I was brand new to the industry. I was like, hey, I don't know a lot about what you do. Teach me. Why do you do things this way? And just asking questions and making sure you are knowledgeable and can speak confidently with what you're doing. No one wants a recruiter that is BSing them the entire time, right?
No, I think there's beauty in being new to the industry, right? Because you can ask questions that maybe somebody that's been in it for 20 years feels uncomfortable asking, and maybe even getting to know the managers at the individual locations. I think there's so much importance in that because you might get a better sense of a fit for that person, and maybe that's one of the things I'm really passionate about is don't just find a warm body to go in there. Find somebody that actually fits the mold of what the culture is in that shop. And for those of us that have lots of different shops out there, the different personalities, even though it's under the same umbrella, the different personalities that are in each one of those shops. And some, maybe that younger tech fits better in this shop rather than this other shop where it's got an older manager and they've got a veteran crew. I think just being able to piece it together so that that when you send that person there, they're going to have a good experience. And I think that's an evolution I think our industry has done a fairly good job at the last few years, is starting to rather than just hire on technical skill, find the person that's going to fit that so that they are happy, the employer's happy and the technician is happy. Because if you just force it with money and it doesn't fit, it doesn't matter how much you pay them, they're going to be miserable.
Absolutely. That's the biggest thing. You, as a recruiter, you have to advocate for both sides, right? You have to make sure that person coming into the shop is as good of a fit for our shop as our shop is for them. Because you can't, it's all about transparency at this point, especially when they are not actively seeking a new opportunity. If you lie to them, they're going to find out. It's going to come
Yes.
out, and then we're going to be filling the same position in 2 weeks down the road. So it's that fine line, that balance of advocating for the business, but also advocating for the candidate and making sure that it is a mutually beneficial relationship.
What a good statement that was right there, because I think you're incredibly right. Like, what's the point in uh, maybe overselling something that's not right or that's not accurate when they're in the shop, because they're going to find out, they're going to come work for you, and then if it doesn't align with what you said, uh, they're gonna they're gonna call you out, right? And they're probably
Yeah.
going to tell their friends, and it's just not going to be a good experience for anybody. So rather than do that, and this is something our industry has actually really struggled with, is the transparency piece in general, of being able to be upfront, be confident in who you are. I say it all the time, but there's no business out there that's perfect, right? And I think the more you can come to terms with that, and you can tell the truth about, this is good. This, we're working on it, but as long as you're working on it and moving in the right direction, I think you build trust with them when you provide a little bit more transparency.
Yeah, and that's what all good relationships are built on, is that foundation of trust. And I think that's something we experience on the daily. I know compensation is a big thing with the industry we're recruiting from. And so if I'm bringing you in at the top of our range, I'm going to tell you that, because I'm going to make sure you are aware that, hey, your annual raise might not be that big. You're going to have to wait until you get promoted into that next level, but we want you. Here's what we can do. Here's your career path. Like, outlining all of that is super critical, but it just doesn't make sense to lie to them on the front end just to get them in the door.
No, no, and I think at times that's maybe where recruiters got a bad name in the past too, right? It was just trying to oversell something to fill the role. But the more, and I think you're lucky because you're doing it for your company, right? And I think you take pride in that, and you're able to build relationships with those people, where when I say those people, both the managers and the person that you're recruiting, so that you do have a good idea of what you're signing up for or what that person's going to sign up for. So I think that's really important. As far as the technicians themselves, when you're talking to them, do you get a sense of what they're looking for, or maybe let me rephrase that, a sense of why they're looking in the first place, and maybe why they would be open to taking a call with you? But what is it about maybe a shop that they're coming from that they're not overly thrilled with?
Yeah, and it's going to vary by technician, right? But that's always one of the things I ask is, hey, why did you take my call? Why are you open to a new opportunity? Because that also gives me insight on what I can sell them on, right? So if it's shift, and a lot of time it's shift or lack of growth opportunities. So we pull candidates from mom and pop shops, from big carriers, things of that nature. A lot of carriers are similar to us, where a lot of our senior technicians are tenured. They've been here forever and they're not going anywhere until they retire. However, we are slowly getting to that point where a lot of our senior technicians are going to retire. And so we're being proactive on that front within our company and looking at flexible headcount and being able to promote. I know we're allotted for maybe 3 or 4 senior technicians, but we have this great tech that we don't want to lose, and if we don't promote them, we're going to lose them. So we kind of have some flexibility in being able to promote, and being just flexible in that regard, right? And making sure that we can sell our career pathing and our growth, and being able to show that, hey, we build our people, we don't want to lose our people. But that's one of the most common I see, is lack of room for growth with where they're currently at. And then shift is another one. No one wants to work that second shift. We struggle to staff our second shifts. Everyone wants Monday through Friday days, right? So being able to sell that and show them, hey, we, as soon as a day shift becomes available, we offer that to our internals first. And just, maybe it's not what they are immediately looking for, but if you can sell them on the opportunities, that's going to be huge. Also, not feeling important, wanting to make a difference, wanting to be less of just a number, and wanting to feel valued and heard. Those are probably the top three that we see. And we try to make sure we outline how we're different in those regards.
Yeah, I think you hit on the funny part was you didn't say pay. And I think a lot of times, that's what a common misconception is that they're looking because they want that, in the past it was like, I'm going to leave for $1 an hour more. I think most of these shops are really taking care of their people in terms of pay, or they're shifting to, if they're not competitive, be competitive, because if they don't, they're going to lose their people. But they want to be valued. We talk about this a lot, where oftentimes they're leaving their manager, not the company. And I think that's such a big piece to understand, that, if you're having retention issues at a specific location, that you need to look a little bit further into it, because it might be something where you've got a bad attitude as a manager, or you've got maybe somebody that came from a technician role into management and didn't get the proper training. So you've got to maybe focus on training a little bit. But, I think the management side of it is so key. And then moving to the other things that you said, with scheduling is such an important piece, in the flexibility. And to move, I think that career pathing almost plays into that, because like you said, if they're on night shift right now, or second shift, that they could move, or they'll be the first option to move up. I think it all comes down to, like, putting yourself in their shoes, right? Because nobody wants to go to a place that you don't know what your next step is, or what your next, if you're hiring good people, they want to know what that next step is. They want to know they're aspirational. They want to move their way up. Even if it means, moving from one level technician to another level technician, being able to ramp up, they want to know that there's opportunity there. And I think we pin that on millennials a lot and younger people, but I always look at, like, that 50-year-old tech that has 15 years to work, and they probably want to know what their path is as much as anybody. We pin it on young people, but that tenured person wants to know as much as anybody, and maybe they're just perfectly happy with where they're at, and that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But we oftentimes just pin career pathing on young people, when I think in reality it's across the board. Everybody wants to know kind of what their future looks like.
Yeah, and I think you have to have those ongoing conversations, right? Because while someone might be happy right now, next year at this time, they might not be. Maybe they are ready to take on that next step, and just making sure you have those open lines of communication and outlining, hey, okay, you want to be a tech 3 for however long until you retire? Great. If that changes, make sure you come talk to me, or just making sure managers check in and say, hey, this still stand? Are you still happy? Anything we can do to help get you to that next step that you want to get to? Just having open lines of communication, I think, is extremely important.
Yeah, and that's in any business, in any relationship. I think that's where a lot of stuff falls apart, is in communication. And you're right. I mean, I remember managing groups of techs and having a conversation with this one specifically, just having a really good conversation with them. They seemed extremely happy. And then it was like 2 weeks later, and the manager said something, his direct manager said something to him that upset him. And then he just held on to it for like another 2 weeks. And so, like, it was only a month split between when we talked and he was super happy, to the time that, like, he had approached me and said, hey, you know what, I'm not that happy because of this. And it had happened like right after our talk. And I was like, kind of blown away, because I think in management, it can get really easy to sit back and say, okay, I talked to Joe, a month ago. He's good. He's happy. But we're all human beings. We're all emotional at some level. And if something shifts that, you got to stay on top of it. And it's really hard to do.
Yeah. And also learning, like some of our bigger shops, thankfully, we do manage the load of direct employees through supervisors and everything like that, but it can get really hard to maintain those conversations if you have a big ratio of employees to supervisors, and some of your employees aren't going to be comfortable initiating those conversations. So
No.
we need to make sure that we are initiating them and allowing them. Like, that's one thing for me as a leader, is I don't ever want someone leaving to come as a surprise. I want to have those conversations. If you're not happy, come talk to me. I hope you're willing to come talk to me. But I'm also going to facilitate those conversations and make sure we're talking outside of just your annual performance review. I want to know week in, week out, how are things going? What are you stressed about? How can I clear your path? Anything like that. And I think that's something we do really well at US Xpress.
Yeah.
I definitely love to boast on our shops for career pathing and having those conversations and just being open and honest about what someone needs to do to get to that next level.
I love that.
Technicians, are you looking for a new job? Even if you're just casually looking, you need to check out Reverse Job Posts. Reverse Job Posts flips the traditional job board around. Now you can fill out a short questionnaire and let shops reach out to you with job opportunities. No resume needed. The best part is all of your contact information remains anonymous until you are ready to share it. It's a great way to explore new job opportunities, and it's completely free. Download the WrenchWay app in the App Store or on Google Play to try Reverse Job Posts for free. Links to download are in the show notes.
I'm going to kind of throw a loaded question at you here. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to recruiting, would you say?
Lack of candidates, lack of talent pool, just because I would say they're not heavily present on your typical job boards, right? They are passive job seekers. You have to find them. You have to get creative. You have to figure out where your audience lives. So something we've started within the last year or two is paid media ads and getting on a bunch of different job boards, not just your big Indeed, but getting Google ads out there. So if they're looking for diesel tech jobs somewhere, we are also going to be popped up in their search bar, and just building your brand awareness, building that reputation, which again goes back to happy employees. Word of mouth referrals are huge. But just finding your audience, getting in front of the younger technicians at the school level, and figuring out where your audience lives is the biggest challenge, and keeping up with when it shifts, because it shifts constantly.
Yes. And that is a big challenge, because I think I just talked to a technician on another podcast about this, and the assumption that all technicians are the same, right? We kind of are guilty of putting all technicians in the same bucket, but when you dive into it and you get to know them, you see the variety of different backgrounds and the variety of different personalities that technicians possess. Some of them might be gamers, some of them might be hunters, some of them might be, they like to farm on the side, I think it's just getting to know them and knowing who your demographic is. The challenge being that when you really dive into it, there are a variety of different backgrounds. So it's not like you're going to do one thing and then all of a sudden all of these people are going to come. You've got to meet them at their level a lot of times, and that level could be far different than what you think it is.
Yeah, and just not being afraid to retry things. So if one thing didn't work last month, it might work this month. If your audience level is down in one area, trying something new. And just one of the things our SVP said to me when I first started, and it has stuck with me, is to fail forward. So take the risks, try the things, figure out what works, figure out what doesn't work, learn from it, and continue to move forward. And that's something I try to instill in my team when they get creative. Hey, you want to try a Craigslist ad? Okay, let's try it. You want to try posting in one of the job boards or joining the mechanic groups on Facebook? Okay, try it. Let me know how it works. Like, what's the harm in trying something, right?
Well, I think you learn so much that way, right? I know I've done that over the course of my career is being able to try things, see if they work, or maybe they kind of work but don't really work, and then you adjust your strategy a little bit and be able to attack it a different way. But what I find is that a lot of people will try one thing once and it doesn't work the way they thought it would, and then they just never do it again. And even coming from the industry side, I remember I had a boss at one point that there was a product I wanted to bring in to sell, and they're like, oh no, we tried that like 10 years ago. Nobody bought it at all. And I'm like, well, it's shifted. Like the equipment is better for it, that kind of stuff. But when you have that mindset, I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice. Like when you have that mindset of, you know what, we've tried that before, didn't work, but maybe there's a different way of going about that same approach. And and I think if nothing else, it gets you to open your mind a little bit and think through problems rather than just assuming that whatever you're going to do isn't going to work.
Yeah, we do a ton of A/B testing, right? So on our paid media ads, in our messaging that we're sending to passive candidates, one month we might highlight our sign-on bonus, another month we might highlight our paid certifications, and seeing what gets the better response rate. And of course, it's going to be dependent upon the person too. So everyone cares about something different, but just trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and switching things up and keeping the creative side to it is super important.
Well, and I think that, again, you hit on another great point that this has shifted to almost marketing as much as recruiting, right? And that's even within
Mm-hmm.
our own company, that was a big shift that we had. And it was because you're not getting enough candidates to even interview, right? So you have to take a different approach to this. And really, when you had mentioned it earlier, build an audience. That's what you're trying to do so that people are aware of you and people know who you are, so that when you do go out and ask for somebody to come work for you, they have familiarity and they are more likely to to make that jump if it's a good fit for them. And I think that's just such a great takeaway from this is that when you shift your thinking that way, you're not looking at it as transactional. You're not looking at it as I have to fill that one position. But when you're doing the A/B testing and you're trying it in different markets and you're doing different things, you're giving yourself an advantage because you're being proactive with it and you're building an audience. And I just when you said the A/B testing, that's very much a marketing term, but it's
Mm-hmm.
something that we do every day, and I think it's what the best recruiters do. I just in general, the best shops do that better than others. It is truly a proactive approach rather than sitting on your hands and waiting for applicants to come in.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we have grown a lot within the last 3 years of recruiting, is going from a reactive state to a proactive state and playing the long game. Because yes, you have a position open right now, but you need to build your brand awareness and get in front of not just diesel technicians, but their family, their friends, people that are going to see US Xpress, recognize the name and say, hey, have you ever thought about working for them? Or, hey, I saw they were hiring. Have you thought about it? I know you're looking, and building that word of mouth. But it's not just we have one spot to fill today. It's we're growing. We have a ton of spots to fill down the road. It's all about the long game.
I love to hear that. That is like the one of the favorite things I've ever heard over the course of the podcast is that right there, because that's literally what it's all about. And I recall when I had first started in my professional career, I worked for a company called Diesel Injection Service. Still great friends with those people to this day. That's now called Diesel Forward. But when I was out amongst my friend group, one of the crazy parts that would happen is like people would come up to me and say, hey, you got into diesel injection service? Like that's a hard place to get into. When's the last time any shop had like somebody that's like that's a hard place to get into? It doesn't happen because they've always got
No,
open positions. But if you can create that feeling that hey, you're lucky to get in there, yeah, you've just changed the game.
absolutely. I love that. I think that's what all shops need to strive for is creating that reputation that, hey, we're a great place to work, here's why. And also like getting in front of the younger generations, the generations that need to get into this industry, help build the industry and play the long game. I know that not every high school student I talk to is going to come work for US Xpress, but down the road, they might start at a dealer and then say, hey, I don't really want to do dealer work anymore. I want to do preventative maintenance. And then they're going to be my employee down the road. So it may not be immediately effective and get an immediate ROI, but it will down the road. And I think you have to look big picture when it comes to recruiting. It can't just be one singular position at one shop.
And I think one advantage that you probably have is that you're just a genuinely nice person, right? Like you're very outgoing and very nice. And I think that sticks with people, and especially young people, when they talk to an adult that's approachable and it doesn't feel intimidating, they might look 5 years down the road and say, hey, I remember talking to Morgan and she was really, really nice. And I don't think that goes away. I think even from my experience, I remember thinking that with companies that I would remember one person in the company and how they treated me, and that really kind of set the stage for whatever was going to happen next. And I think that's somewhat underrated, just being a nice person, because when you can do that, I think that shows you it paints your company in a really positive light.
Yeah, and I think from a recruiting standpoint, that's something that I have always been very cognizant of is I am their first point of contact into a company, no matter if it was recruiting for US Xpress or recruiting for any of the companies in my past. I am their first point and their first impression of US Xpress. That is big shoes to fill, right? We don't want them to have a terrible experience. And candidate experience is one of the things that we prioritize as a team, and just trying to always make it as efficient and smoothest and best experience possible. Customer service and sales is the two main things that I think go into recruiting, and customer service is number one. They are your customer as a candidate. Yes, we want them to fill our position, but if they have a terrible time, they're not gonna come work for us. And then they're also going to tell other people, hey, I just interviewed with them, it was a terrible time, don't bother. And then it's snowballs and it's just not great.
No, so talk to me about candidate experience a little bit. What do you mean when you're talking about candidate experience?
Yeah, so candidate experience, it is the full process from that initial message my recruiter sends to day one and beyond. So my team hands them off day one to HR, but you still got to maintain that experience after that, right? But from the recruiting standpoint, our biggest thing is to make it as easy and efficient as possible on the candidate. We want to work with you. It sucks having to take time off of work to go do an interview. So if we can get you in on your lunch break, great. You need to interview on a weekend. If our shops are open on the weekends, great. We will set you up with a supervisor on a weekend. We want to make it as convenient as possible, as easy and smooth as possible. So efficiency is what we are all about. Also, sense of urgency. We know if we are talking to them, we know 6 other recruiters are probably talking to them. And if we don't act fast, we're going to lose them.
Yeah, that's a really good mentality. And I think, when you started there, did you understand the candidate experience, or like was it something where you looked at it and made tweaks to it along the way? I know when we had talked previously, that was one of the things that really stuck out to me, was that you were really able to go out and grab the reins and run with it, right? And I think that is so important. Looking at candidate experience in a way where you're stepping back and kind of looking at the whole process is so important. And I don't think a lot of people do it. I think they, are very reactive when it comes to candidate experience. Was that something that you found when you got to US Xpress? Was that something that you helped kind of move the needle one way, or were they already in pretty good shape when you got there?
Yeah, so we have changed a ton. Customer service, I have been in customer service since I was 14. So that's always been at the forefront of my mind. Also, I move extremely fast, so I want things to be as efficient as possible. When I first started, we had a pretty manual process, and we have since become very automated, which is really cool to see. We've integrated some AI technology. So now on some of our landing pages and our job boards, we have an AI chatbot that can answer some initial questions, or can schedule them directly on a recruiter's calendar. They can work through the chatbot to reschedule and cancel or ask questions. And our chatbot also sends reminders of, hey, your phone interview is coming up in 24 hours. Hey, your phone interview is in 30 minutes. Just trying to maintain that communication, but also make sure my recruiters are able to focus on other things and taking some of the manual aspects out of it. We just launched live chat with our AI bot, so they can start asking questions, and it will prompt them of, hey, do you want to call US Xpress? Do you want to live chat with a recruiter? And we can be like IMing, chatting back and forth, answering questions, not wasting the candidate's time if our positions aren't a good fit. Like if you want $75 an hour, I probably can't give that to you for my entry-level role that we have open. And just making sure that it's as convenient as possible. We've also, for our entry-level role specifically, we have made it so our recruiters can make offers directly. So they only do one phone interview. And if we want to make them an offer, we make it either on the spot or by the end of the day if they have multiple interviews going on. Of course, we still want to get that best fit for the company, but we have made it so that our recruiters are confident and comfortable and knowledgeable enough to make that decision, to free our managers up to focus on the higher technical skill positions, not inundate them with a ton of entry-level positions. Interviews, because we get a lot of no-shows. That's the nature of it as well. And so trying to maintain the flow of the business, make it as efficient as possible for the candidate and everyone involved. That's just the market that we are in. We have to move fast, and so we are figuring out what we can do on all fronts to make it move as quickly as possible.
Have you ever talked to a technician that has ghosted you?
Oh, so many times.
And what was their reasoning? We actually did a WrenchWay poll, I don't know, probably 6 months ago, and we had some fascinating, and the cool part when we had that piece of it was that it was anonymous, so they could give their feedback without actually tying their name to it. And we had asked, it was something about percentage of you that have ghosted an employer, and then we dove into like, why did you ghost that employer? And some of the responses were fascinating. Like I think there's so much value in, even if they didn't come work for you, understanding, why did you ghost me? We talked, we set up an appointment, we did all of this stuff, and then you didn't show up. And some of the responses, I'm curious to what you've heard, but some of the responses were really interesting and pretty valid as to why they ghosted, right? And maybe it was that, you know, somebody promised them that the facilities were a certain way, and when they drove up into the parking lot, they're like, it wasn't what I expected. Or, a lot of times maybe it's they told their employer they were looking, and that employer countered at a much higher level. But most of the time, when they ghosted and didn't communicate whatsoever, it was because something didn't align with what was talked about. And I think, we hear it from shops all the time that ghosting is a big issue. And I'm curious, I'm getting more curious with this in terms of, do we actually reach out and talk to the candidate after they ghosted us, just to say, hey, this didn't work out, but I'd love feedback on what drove that?
Yeah, and so we don't get a ton of responses from those that ghost us. We always try to reach out, especially if they make it to like, hey, I accepted the offer, but now I'm not completing my onboarding stuff. We try to get feedback, but a lot of people just don't
No.
respond. I would say majority of the time it's their current employer countered, or they got another offer that they couldn't refuse, and they don't really give a reason as to why they did not communicate that to us. I think that's just the nature of communication in this day and age. I see it in all facets of my life, not just recruiting. So it's just, but we always try to send an email or a text. Even we don't even necessarily, yes, we do call, but a lot of people don't like the confrontation of it, and they don't want to have a conversation about it. So we always say, hey, we would love to know what changed your mind or what stopped you, if you're willing to provide any feedback so we can make the process better for any future candidates. Or if anything changes on your end, we'd still love to consider you in the future. Is there anything we can do to change your mind, essentially? And that is on all sides of things. So if I get someone who declines an offer or counters an offer, and we try to make it work in whatever way that we can, or at least get the feedback to try to be able to do better in the future. I can't change things if I don't know they're a problem.
That was something I struggled with when I was on the industry side. You'd get somebody to the interview process, they accept the offer, and then they just don't show up the first day. And I would call and just say, hey, what happened? And you get the voicemail every time. And occasionally I would get somebody to call me back. But what I found was I had a tough time. I'm normally a really positive person and kind of jovial in general. But those conversations, even when I was really trying to hold positive, it was hard for me. And because you put so much work into trying to court that person to come work for you, and so you're like, hey, can you give me some feedback? And it's almost a feeling of rejection, or a feeling that, you didn't do something right. And so you go into it with like mixed emotions, but getting that feedback was so important to me to understand, like, why didn't all these dots connect? And when it felt like we were so close to the finish line, and I don't think I'm alone in that feeling. I don't know how it is for you, but that was something where it's almost like a broken heart syndrome, like where I worked so hard, I'm trying so hard, but it just didn't get to completion.
Yeah, that's actually something I talked to all of my recruiters about in the interview process when I was hiring them. I was like, you have to be okay with rejection. You are going to be rejected more times than you are going to get somebody that accepts your offer. You're going to get ghosted. Like, that is just the nature of the industry and the recruiting that we are in, and you can't take it personal. You just have to take it on the chin, keep moving forward and on to the next one, as insensitive as that sounds, but you can't take it personally. Like, I'm sure every one of us has turned down a job in the past. Yes, I hope that my recruiters gave that person the courtesy of letting them know and communicating, but they have to do what's best for them. And at the end of the day, if we are not the best fit for them, we dodged a bullet in that we're not going to refill that position in a few weeks or a few months, because if they're not sold on the position, they're going to continue looking. It may take it in the interim, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's just going to put more work on us if we hire the person that doesn't want to be there.
That's a good outlook. That's I think a positive outlook. And for those technicians that are out there listening, if you ever have stories of you ghosting an employer, let me know. Reach out to me, because I am always fascinated to learn more about kind of the psychology that goes behind that. And I think in a lot of cases there are good reasons why you as an individual would do that. I just want to learn more about it so that we can then convey that to our clients and be able to teach them better ways of doing this. And just always, to me, that's such a fascinating part of this industry, and something that I think a lot of shops struggle with constantly. And to the point, I've talked to shop owners, dealerships, doesn't matter, and they almost get to the point to where they're surprised when somebody does show up for the interview.
Yes, I feel the same way. Or we have had some notorious positions where we're like, just show up for day one. Like, we don't believe it's filled until the person gets there on day one. And that, it's the hardest market I have seen in my like 6 years of recruiting. It is insane, especially with the pandemic and knowing how competitive It is. The technicians know that. They know that they are in demand and the ball is in their court. And I think that plays a role in the ghosting as well. But honestly, to the technicians out there, rely on your recruiter. Talk to your recruiter. Don't burn your bridges. Like, it might not be a good fit now, but down the road, if our position changes and it's a better shift for you, just let us know. Communicate that out, because honestly, if we offered you once, we would probably offer you again, as long as the communication is there. That's my biggest thing.
Yeah. And a tip for technicians: recruiters keep notes on this stuff, right? So they know when you reach out to them again, like what the prior interaction was, and so that's great advice not to burn bridges. And the market is highly competitive right now, but you never know when you have a buddy that goes and joins that company, and you're like, oh man, I'd like to go work with them. And things can change with a company, and I think it's just so important to at least have the professional courtesy to talk with them, and it can lead to maybe uncomfortable conversations. I don't think they're uncomfortable most of the time. I think it's more of just a general conversation. We understand, like, you guys and gals have a lot of opportunity, but just be communicative with this process, and you'll put yourself kind of ahead of the game.
Yeah, and help make it better for the people that come after you, right? Like, do your part to help make the recruiting process better and easier. And any feedback that they have is good feedback. Even if it's negative feedback, it's good feedback, because we can take action on it then.
Well, if you're in a technician's shoes, you can help point out blind spots for a company, right? Something that maybe you or I wouldn't see, but was really, really impactful for you. I know when we had built our platform out, that was one of the things we looked at in work environment. We have a section in our under the hood section that's work environment, and I probably underestimated how important that section is on the page to a technician until we started really hearing from technicians about, how much they wanted to know that information that is in that particular section. And we wouldn't have known that without getting that feedback. And I think the same goes for shops that are out there. The more that you can provide a shop, I think all technicians want better work environments, better pay, better, everything across the board. But unless you're giving that feedback and in a productive way, don't just go to a recruiter, don't just go to a shop and say, this place was garbage, and like, give them actual good candid feedback, and they'll take it seriously. The good shops will anyways. They'll take it seriously, take it back and talk about it internally about ways that they can tweak it and improve it, because you're absolutely right, Morgan, in that they know they have leverage right now. But from a technician standpoint, if you guys can be able to give good productive feedback, it's going to make your life better in some way, shape, or form down the road. Because if that shop gets better, that's going to put pressure on another shop to get better, in general. And I think that's not a bad thing. Like, you can drive the improvement of the industry by giving that feedback.
Absolutely, 100%. And we ask for feedback throughout our candidate experience as well. So, like, after they schedule their phone interview, especially when we rolled out the self-scheduling through our AI technology, we rolled out, hey, was this convenient? Was this easy? Do you have any feedback on it? After their phone interview is completed, we send the automated message as well. Hey, is your recruiter friendly, punctual? Any additional feedback, like an open-ended question? Then we ask it once they're onboarded and after their 30, 60, 90 days. And we try to get that feedback. And then with our ongoing employees, we do engagement surveys. And we changed so much this last year with the engagement survey. And our technicians and employees across the company realized that, hey, they took that feedback seriously. Like, we have pet insurance as a benefit now, because that's what our employees wanted. I'm super grateful for it, because as you saw, I have dogs. So like, things like that. And it's the little things that companies don't know what they want unless they get the feedback. And I think it's super important to let your voice be heard. What's the harm in giving the feedback? What's the worst that can happen? It doesn't go into play.
Yeah. Any advice for surveying in terms of getting good, candid feedback?
Yeah, I would say know your audience. Our engagement surveys specifically are anonymous, like they are tied to the employee as it will pull what department you're in, but your name is anonymous. So we know specifically, okay, this department feels this way, and we can look at trends and everything like that. But the anonymous side of things makes people a little bit more comfortable to speak freely in what we've seen. But just prompting them to give the feedback. A lot of times people don't necessarily give unsolicited feedback. So just asking the questions. If you want to know something, ask.
How do you, one of the, I think, obstacles that companies try to, they maybe, it's a challenge that they face, which is a employee not feeling comfortable giving feedback because they think that the company's going to know who sent that feedback. And I think trust in that process is so big that they're not going to get in trouble. They're not going to get scolded by the feedback that they're giving. And I think if they don't feel comfortable or they don't feel confident that it is truly uh, uh, confidential or anonymous, that they're not going to give you that unfiltered feedback that you need, because there's a lot of managers out there that get really, really defensive when they see that type of information. And so how important is that comfort level that they feel confident enough in their company that they can give good, honest feedback without getting in trouble for it?
I think that's everything. I think that you have to consciously and actively create that culture and build that culture. And so that comes from acting on the feedback that you receive, even if you can't put into action what someone is requesting, follow up with them, tell them why. If it's not anonymous, of course, if it's anonymous, it's hard to do all of the follow up. But if they see the action is being taken on some of the things that were requested or the feedback was given, that helps create that culture. I think from like an HR perspective, we've also started doing stay interviews with our employees to
Love that.
work on retention numbers and just building that culture of, hey, we do truly value your feedback. We can't fix things if we don't know there's an issue, and just being genuine about it. I think there are a lot of companies that send out surveys but don't act on the results of them. That's one thing I will brag on US Xpress all day long. I think we do a really good job of acting on things, providing feedback on things we're not acting on, and just taking our employees' concerns into action. And just, I think all you can do is work to be better each and every day, building your culture, instilling your folks. And if you have your senior level technicians specifically, got to get buy-in from them, because they're going to be your biggest cheerleader. If you have a tenured employee that can speak on, hey, do the survey, this and this changed from the last one that we did, or whatever the case may be, is you have to just build your culture and get that buy-in. But that is, you have to take an active approach to it. It's not, you can't create culture passively.
You are so correct. Culture is, you have to be a good place to work, right? In this day and age, if you're not a good place to work and you're not treating your people right, word spreads fast. Social media is a blessing and a curse. In a lot of cases, it can spread the word of something maybe unflattering about you, as a company. And I think you can solve a lot of problems when you sit and focus on being a good company, and taking feedback and actively looking at the feedback. I know when I walked away from our initial conversation, I was so impressed with not only you, but what US Xpress is doing in that capacity to be proactive in talking about it and what can we change, what can we make better, what can we, what can we adapt to, and I give you and all of the staff there a lot of credit for really being able to look at it through a realistic lens and make adjustments that are impactful. Because if you're not doing that as a business right now, you're gonna get left in the dust.
Absolutely. And I know during our initial conversation, we talked a lot about how recruitment and retention go hand in hand. And I am so beyond grateful to have such great HR partners and great partners in our upper leadership within our maintenance department, because they want to make positive changes. And we meet monthly pretty much to do retention meetings to talk through what recruiting is doing and what we're doing from a retention standpoint, what has come out of the stay interviews that we're doing. It's how we started our maintenance appreciation week that we first did last year, and that we'll continue to do annually now. But you just have to have the conversations and be open to, hey, we're maybe not doing the best here. How can we fix it? And just try to be, 1% better every day. It's small improvements that make big improvements.
How do you, when you go into a retention meeting, how do you start it? Like, is it talking about some of the internal surveying that you're doing, or is it just you're talking about problems with, or I shouldn't even say problems, but maybe some level of conflict within a shop? How do you go about those meetings?
Yeah, the first one we ever did was probably one of the best meetings I've ever been in. And it was just a brain dump. We got all of our key players in there. So directors, VPs, recruiters, HR business partners, benefits, everyone that could play a role in it was in the room, and we just started talking. Whether it's what I'm seeing from candidates in the market, what do they want coming into a new company? What are we seeing from exit interviews? Is there trends? What aren't we doing that we could be doing? And realistically, what is the timeline of how we can implement this? Where are our quick wins? What is our long-term plan? We just started talking, and we slowly built it out. And then each retention meeting now has a little bit more of a structured agenda, and we go over the stay interviews, things we're working on. So I know we do sign-on bonuses for recruiting occasionally. The stay interviews, what shops are on trend or on the list for the next quarter of where we're going. Are these the priorities? Are we seeing any issues in recruiting in certain markets? Because we know that the talent pool, the external talent pool, is dwindling. There are only so many technicians in these areas, and the competition is continuously growing. So retention is even more critical now than it ever has been, because we have good people. We want to keep our good people, and you can't focus all of this effort on bringing in new talent when you have great talent here. You have to show that appreciation.
I think one of the coolest things about what you just said is that your upper level management is willing to listen. And if you can do all of this in the world, but if your upper level management isn't listening or open to critical feedback, I don't think you can change. I've seen that with a lot of companies where maybe the upper level management isn't listening, and when they're not listening or open to new ideas and have to have all of the ideas, I don't think that is healthy for a company. And the fact that you at US Xpress have a team that is open to listening and open to changing is what's going to make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. Like I said, I'm beyond grateful for the relationship that I have with both HR and our senior leadership, because I can't be successful in what I do if I do not have the support from all sides. And I think that is key, because anyone I bring in is going to then be a customer of HR and a customer essentially to our leadership team. And I think that's the way that you have to look at it, is your employees are essentially your customer too, right? You're there to make their job as easy as possible to let them be successful. So if something is standing in their way, how can we fix it? And having the support of upper leadership is incredible. They will push out any of my crazy ideas or things that I want to try, and getting their leaders on board is key. We have some really great relationships with our shop managers. They are confident and they trust the recruiting team. They're confident and trust the HR team, and we are truly partners, which is something that I have not had the luxury of having in the past, which is super cool.
Yeah, it is. And I think, to give you credit, I think you've earned that voice, and I think you've really done a great job being innovative and trying to push the envelope on things. Today was a true pleasure, and I hope we can get you back on the podcast at some point in the near future. We didn't even get to talk about some of the stuff we had listed out, so I apologize for that, but it was just really good conversation and things that I think a lot of shops struggle with, in that you were able to provide some just awesome insight. So we appreciate you joining us on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and I would be happy to come back at any time.
We're definitely going to take you up on that.
Awesome.
Thanks again.